Thank you. Um, we have about 10 minutes to open it up for questions. If I can request you to keep your questions really short before we come back to close. So, open house. Yeah. Yeah. We'll take about 3 or 4 questions before we open it up.
Yeah, just like that.
My question is to Mr. Rajiv Kumar. Sir, a few months ago, you talked about, let me say what you talked about. You said you need public transport. India needs public transport more and more. A few months ago, the government of India raised substantially the Delhi metro fares, and the ridership has come down, and it has become, I mean, Ola share and Uber share are cheaper than the metro rides in certain instances, and people are using them more car on the road, there is more pollution, vehicle pollution. So how do you think this decision, was it good, bad, ugly, foolish,
Thank you.
and what does the economy, your economy, economics says about it?
Thank you.
Second question is to Mr. Godrej.
Sorry, just have time for one question per person so that we get a room full. Just in the interest of democracy, anyone from this side would like to ask a question?
Luxembourg recently
Yeah,
became
yes,
a city
if you could
which
just
has
allow me
made
to-
the public transport free. Your comments on it?
Thanks. Anyone from this side?
Sir, my question is, what is the greatest challenge today? Is it the income gap between the poorest and the richest, or jobs for this existing and the new ones? Because of disruptive technology, many jobs will be lost, and there is a huge unavailability of the existing who are doing that. There is a huge problem of the secure job in the government pensions and all, and the people who don't have any security. In this country is the only country in the world which says so many things, but for the poorest of the poor, they don't either have social security for the injured, this old or disabled and all that. What we are leading to?
Thank you.
Is it leading to some this very obstructive capital system?
Sure.
Or
Thank
is
you.
it a social system we are doing?
Thank you. There's a question at the back. Okay, Amy, and then at the back.
Hi, I have a question for Pratap. Today on Twitter, we saw kind of interesting photos that seemed really out of character with the prevailing age, which was that Shivraj Chauhan sat on the stage while power was handed over to Kamal Nath, and then out of Rajasthan, there was a photo of Jyotiraditya Scindia being hugged by his aunt at the installation of Congress in Rajasthan. It seems that one of the kind of really big problems is that the political class here appears to be at such intensive war with each other that they're not trying to, find common ground and constructive solutions and build a consensus. And of course, I'm not saying I must acknowledge that my own country is in a rather similar dismaying state. But I just wondered, Pratap, I mean, how can this be overcome, or can it be overcome, where parties that seem at utter war with each other still get together to try to come up with solutions to the very profound challenges? Or is that just too much to hope for?
There's a question at the back, and then we'll come back.
Thank you very much. I suppose the concern which has been raised for the Indian 21st centuries are up to date. But if we take an example of South Korea, they have got the independence as well. We have got the same year. They are ruling the entire world with 15% of their global trade. Now, I want to ask Mr. Rajiv Kumar, is there any program of the government to bring a drastic change in education so that we can blend ourselves, the corporate and the universities, in such a way that we can move rapidly with the change of technology, sir? Thank you.
Thanks. Maybe we can have one round of responses before we do one last round of questions. Rajiv?
Yeah. Got a question here. I mean, it's you can't run a system unless you cover the costs. So you've got to have that in mind. And for me, the public transport, by the way, includes Ola, Ubers, and other things. So they may not be as environmentally friendly as the metro, but nonetheless, they are not private transport. They are shared. So that's the short answer to that one. The other one on the education, I did mention, I don't think the government of India has, to the best of my knowledge, a plan ready-made or sort of about to be launched to change the whole education system of our country, etc. But yes, there are several steps being taken to improve the quality of the higher education, to give it more autonomy, to make it better, to make it globally competitive. But I think for me the more important thing was primary education and even early childhood education, and even more than that, because I also happen to at the moment chair that particular mission, malnourishment. 38% of our children being malnourished. We keep talking about everything else, but look, you can't have a proper education. At least you can't educate a child whose brain development is not as much as it should be. So, I think for me the priority is very clear. I would have that and my 50% of my mothers not being anemic, and also think about the education system, etc. But I somehow said, this has been last 1 year, I don't see those things being discussed in amongst our, midst, as to how that lot is, surviving and what we need to do for that in a very major way. And we have failed our people, for the last so many years, if our malnourishment levels still remain 50% or more in more than 200 districts of our country. So I think those are the priorities. It's just a matter of setting priorities, I think, and then I think we can begin to solve them.
So I actually don't entirely agree with you. I mean, one of the reasons democracy survived is that, there has been this, old joke about India that, there's kind of politics dancing on the surface, and then there's a kind of set of social relationships. And I think, these have cut across party lines. It's good to see it now in this kind of very manifest way. But I think we get too sentimental about this stuff. We get too sentimental about this stuff because at the end of the day, it's really not about did you hold his hand for one photo op. At the end of the day is, are there some basic norms that you don't cross when institutions function, right? I think that's the, so that sentiment is good and it does. I think, you might say Indian democracy has survived somewhat dysfunctional institutions sometimes because there is actually lots of different kinds of sociability around. But to translate that into political outcomes, actually it has to be mediated through institutions.
I can't resist any but very old anecdote because we used to hear when I was actually in college, which is that in Indian politics, when the politicians get together, and have a big feast, first thing says, look, we are from the same caste, we are from the same region, and also we are from different political parties. So there is a consensus which is working. So this apparent fight that you have, etc. There is a reasonable level of people talking to each other, etc., etc. And it's not as if it's all. Otherwise, you would have been lost a long time ago.
There's also consensus across the board on how not to let institutions function.
There you are.
What's been happening in Parliament. We have only time for one last round of questions. I'm going to be an authoritarian Democrat and pick and choose 3 questions. Apologies for that. So we'll take 2 from this side, Meenakshi and Qureshi Saab, and then I'll take 2 from this side. Meenakshi. I think we pick the mic right up here.
Thank you for a really interesting panel discussion. I was wondering if I could get up to help us unscramble our understanding of what Rajiv meant by competitive federalism. He also spoke about aspirational districts. And the one elephant in this room is, what about aspirational universities? You're talking about generating an alternative paradigm, a new discourse. Where is this going to come from? From the so-called global universities or the world-class universities? We can't let you off without speaking on education. Thank you.
My question is about the paradox of democracy. While Economist Intelligence Unit, which brings out a democracy index every year, and there are 10 other indexes of other organizations, they consistently show Indian election is excellent, 9.7 out of 10, but show India's democracy as a flawed democracy. And in fact, in the last 3-4 years, we have slipped from the 27th position to 38th position. Question is for Rajiv. Are you aware of this, and do you have any plan to reverse this situation?
Thanks. Two questions. Okay, Marie-Ellen and the lady there.
Thanks you, Yamini. I think I want to re-ask a question that has been asked before. My understanding of urban public policies, since I've been following the urban question, is that actually there is a large consensus across parties around the kind of core issues around urban question. And some of them are around the question of cost, about the question of reducing public sector. That has happened, as you said, because of rise of private, the aspiration that private sector would fill in. And my question is about public transport. I think if we look at 21st century transition, this is the topic of today, and we think of climate change and giving access to all to public transport, the answer about the cost of the metro has to be recovered might haunt you again, because this question will be raised in the 21st century. So how do we answer this question if we shift totally the lens from which we look at projects? And I think this is a very central question that is being asked everywhere.
Sure. And just last question, right there. Yeah.
My question is to Mr. Rajiv Kumar. Sir, I just wanted to enlighten myself about the fact that when government comes out with big policy, things like GST, Ayushman Bharat, is there any consultation with the people it's going to affect? You know, is that part of the government process in planning and implementing? And secondly, I also wanted to ask you about Ayushman Bharat. A lot of people are saying that it's going to fail, actually. So, you know, has there been any attempt to, you know, sort of really work a political will and bureaucratic will?
It'll fail because?
Sort of, you know, bringing up the quality of the primary health centers and also the district hospitals, you know, so that is what I wanted to ask you. Thank you.
Why will Ayushman Bharat fail?
No, people are saying it might fail because, you know, there's not enough personnel to, you know, sort of check how it's going to work in the hospitals in terms of insurance.
Sorry, I'm going to have to cut you off because Partho says to me that there's one burning question at the back that we must accommodate. So.
Yes, thank you very much. Yes,
of course.
My question is on, I'm interested in leadership and the question of influencing those who have influence. Now, I use my continent where I come from. I'm from Africa, specifically Nigeria, where China is doing a lot of things. And US is trying to come in. Now, instead of going directly to those who have influence, what are they doing? They are trying to go through China, influencing China in order to influence Nigeria. So my question is this leadership, on an aspect of leadership, what effort will India make in trying to go directly and be able to compete favorably with those who have influence?
Thanks. Can I reverse the order of responses? I know, Rajiv, you have lots of questions, but that is the way it is, I suppose. Jamshed, if you would like to just weigh in and any last comments, and then I'll come to you, Nainan, Pratap, and then to you. So you have
I don't have any.
Nainan?
My only comment is that when we look at these issues, you have to keep a sort of long-term objective in mind and then work towards that. If you want proper cities, then you need to start with pricing land, taxation, building roads that can accommodate public transport. Cities have been built properly around the world. Why aren't we doing it? You need local urban government and so on. So if you want to build industry, we're going to be the third largest aviation market.
You can hear it.
Sorry, we're going to be the third largest aviation market in the world by 2030, says IATA. We're going to be the third largest car market in the world by 2030, bigger than Germany and Japan. So can we think of building aircraft? China just started building the Boeings. So if you're going to be buying or needing hundreds of aircraft every year, are we going to import them all from Boeing and Airbus, or can we make them here? Walchand Hirachand in the 1940s thought of making aircraft in India. And in 2018, we can't think about it. You know, so you have to have an objective, saying this is where this economy is going to be. It's going to be the third largest market. It's going to be opportunity for all of international business to come here and sell to us. But can we use the size of our market to build our own industry? You can't be buried in the problems of today. You have to think of tomorrow and work towards that. Thank you.
Thank you. Pratap?
Two questions about competitive federalism. I mean, this would take a whole seminar. So, I mean, you know, federalism has sort of slightly, I think, different take on it. So, obviously, in some cases, competition makes sense. I mean, the idea is it'd be a good thing if states, you know, took pride in saying we have abolished malnutrition or something, and that was really the, you know, the focus of their identities. But I think on a larger scale, the whole federalism, decentralization story, we really haven't got it right. First of all, I think two levels. One, structurally, which is administrative decentralization, political decentralization, fiscal decentralization, all have different logics, and they don't often go together as we used to think. So under this government, we were in this very paradoxical position of ostensibly administrative decentralization, ostensibly to the states, right? But it's not going to happen if you have a centralized party structure. That's the bottom line, right? In fact, often authoritarian governments like to decentralize. Then, of course, the large question of the 73rd, 74th Amendment, which has been completely off the agenda for the last 5 years. I mean, you haven't heard those two numbers for a very, very long time. So I think the competitive federalism thing has, it's been articulated around a set of a couple of sort of narrow issues where you create an index and said how many schools you open, which state has done. Is that enough of an incentive to get the states to do? I mean, my sense is if that's what it takes states to work on that, you'll probably not succeed anyway. So a little bit of that recognition is nice for those states, but I think it doesn't get at the political challenge of federalism. On the question of universities, I think I should plead the Fifth Amendment and not incriminate myself. But broadly speaking, I mean, I think just two quick thoughts. One, I think what is happening to a large chunk of the public university system in India is a scandal. I mean, comparable to the kind of dismantling of higher education that the West Bengal government had done, left front government had done in West Bengal years ago. On higher education, frankly, I've not yet met a political party that understood or is committed to what it takes, other than to small islands of excellence. So that's part we'll do easy. Indian Institute of Science will do fine, IITs will do fine. I think the institutional bottlenecks, the gap between what students want, what they're aspiring to, I mean, this should be the golden age for education in India. And what we do, we go and systematically dismantle two of India's most important public universities, run them into the ground. I'm in a university outside of the state sector, but we know the ecosystem will not function unless it is a good balanced ecosystem of all of these universities. And we hope the worm turns on that, but I think that's one story we've been waiting almost way too long for.
Just to first start off on we do in NITI Aayog focus on local government, local finances. We in fact had a session very recently we have our economists get together every quarter, and the last one we did focus on that because the thought behind that simply is, as I said in my opening remarks, is that competitive federalism will also have to start from there, because how do states perform, different states perform at that level of public delivery and so on. Abysmal figures about how much money the local governments get and so on compared to the others. Let me just leave it there. Qureshi Saab, about, I plead ignorance. I don't know about those numbers. I haven't looked at them. And flawed democracy, I'm not so clear as to what that implies. If it does imply a failure of delivering public services, which is what it should be in my view, or it could be, then of course, I've said this has been the burden of my song actually this evening, that is where we have let our people down, and we have to do that, but we haven't even focused on that. That's the issue. We haven't even focused on that, and so I think we should need to, start doing that, and the sooner we do that, the better, as it were. On issues of Ayushman Bharat, I hope we are able to surprise you. The person in charge is actually somebody who is doing his level best to get this right. And all the issues of moral hazard and corruption and leakages and so on are being taken. We'll use the technology. But yes, absolutely right. Unless we get those 150,000 health and wellness centers going, which is at the cutting edge of delivery of public health, we would fail. So that is where, because Ayushman Bharat looks at only secondary and tertiary sort of healthcare. The primary healthcare and the preventive healthcare would have to come from that. And I think that is where we need to focus much more attention on, and we are trying to do that.
Thank you. Thank you very much to all my panelists for what was a very engaging conversation. I think the big takeaway has been the Indian voter is ready for change. The question is our politics and our institutions are willing and able to respond to that change effectively. And I hope over the next day, tomorrow, we'll delve into some of the more technical aspects of the transitions that we touched upon today, to engage in a more robust dialogue that could at least frame the conversation for our polity and our policymakers going forward. Thank you all for being here. Thank you all, friends, for being back, and thank you, Jamshed and Nainan, for taking the time to be with us today. I'd like to invite all of you to dinner. That's right outside. Thank you so much.
Thank you.